I want to bring on right now Law&Crime's reporter Elizabeth Millner, who is inside that courtroom. We have limited time with Elizabeth. I know she has to jump right back in there. Elizabeth, good to see you. Talk to us about the day, how it started with the continuation of the testimony of this special agent from Homeland Security that was part of the raids that were conducted on Sean Combs' property, and what evidence was found, or potential evidence. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, this testimony is something I myself have been very interested in. And this is no offense to all the witnesses that have been testifying, but I really just wanted to see the physical evidence and see especially what was found in those raids. And so Homeland Security Investigation Special Agent Jared Gammon, he took the stand actually yesterday afternoon. And he at first kind of started going over some of the exhibits, especially what was found in the Miami home. And that's the home on Two-Star Island, So they didn't talk about the LA homes or anything like that as far as what was found in that particular home. Really was just focusing on the Miami estate, essentially, because it's a huge property. And so we found out yesterday that 80 to 90 officers were involved in this search, and a lot of the stuff from today was a little just kind of continuation about everything that was found. So we saw a lot of exhibit photos, and I took, Jesse, a lot of notes, because at this point it was just so many exhibits back to back to back to back that you just were so overwhelmed by everything that was found, essentially. And so we learned yesterday that there were AR-15s inside the Miami property with the scratched off serial numbers. We saw that there were platform high heels that were 7 inches tall inside this Miami home. There were sex items inside this home found in the primary bedroom closet. There were then we got a close up of the red high heels and the sex toys, and then these high heels were actually displayed in front of the jury. So Special Agent Gannon, he just took up the heels, kind of showed them to the jury, then put them back into the evidence box, and then kind of had it with the rest of the evidence. And so they said more than a dozen high heels were actually seized from this property. Then we saw some shoes, we saw some boots in the primary closet, and these were special boots. They were Balenciaga boots that I myself cannot necessarily afford. But inside these boots were 3 cell phones. Diddy didn't have much reaction during this testimony, but it was interesting that these cell phones were found in these Balenciaga boots that were inside the closet. And so we also saw a black Gucci bag that was also found inside the closet, and inside that Gucci bag was pills, a powder substance. There was also eye drops in the bag. And so, you know, that Dr. Seuss kind of story, red fish, blue fish, all that stuff, that was essentially kind of the same thing with pills. And I'm not making light of the situation. There were pink pills, there were white pills, there were yellow pills, there were black pills, there were blue pills, there was a crystallized substance. So inside that Gucci bag, some of the residue found inside actually tested positive for cocaine and ketamine. And then they saw a black straw that was also found in this Gucci bag. It also tested positive for cocaine and ketamine. We saw the Lumify eye drop label, the Lumify eye drop label bottle. So initially I was thinking these were just regular eye drops, but turns out that these eye drops actually tested positive and contained MDMA as well as ketamine. Then we saw a plastic container top. It had kind of the label on it, DBL wash, and that tested positive for cocaine. It was a lot of stuff, Jesse, that we were seeing inside these exhibit photos. A lot of these were pills, tested positive for MDMA. 3 orange pills with a triangular shape that were referred to or had a Tesla label on them. Those tested positive for MDMA. We saw 6 rectangular tablets. Those tested positive for alprazolam, aka Xanax. We saw more Xanax pills in there. We saw a $100 bill that was rolled up that tested positive for cocaine and ketamine. We saw a blue tablet that tested positive for meth and MDMA. Another blue pill that had the same test results. We saw more Xanax pills. Then we get into the master bathroom and we see more exhibit photos. So we see an exhibit photo of the master bathroom and a close-up of this wooden box. And this wooden box had the kind of inscription on top labeled Puffy. And so we got to see what was inside that box. More clear pills, a crystallized substance in that box, and then these capsules that were called golden teachers. And I was like, what are golden teachers? And they are actually mushroom capsules. And so those were displayed to the jury. We saw Ziploc bags of a purple solid crystallized type of material that tested positive for MDMA, ecstasy, as well as Molly. We see more kind of labels of what was going on inside the home in just different rooms, such as we saw zoomed in bottles of baby oil and Astroglide. The special agent said that he had seized 25 bottles of baby oil and 31 bottles of Astroglide from the home, but he said that there was actually more baby oil and more Astroglide that was found. We saw the master closet, which had this vital honey. They didn't go too much into the explanation of what this vital honey actually is. We saw the layout of the guest house, and then we see a handgun as well too that was in one of the utility closets in a suitcase. It was a .45 caliber handgun. They displayed the handgun in court today, and they also seized the magazine ammunition for this .45 caliber handgun. They displayed this magazine to the jury again, as well as the handgun, and then we saw the box of ammo as well too. So Jesse, it was a lot of stuff, and I'm really just not even scratching the surface of just every single exhibit photo that we saw, but it was just a lot of, it was either a lot of drugs, a few kind of guns, because we had the AR-15s again with the scratched off serial number, something that we had known about for a while now, but it was a lot of stuff, but a very interesting testimony, but not seeing too much really reaction from Diddy when all of this evidence was being displayed in court today.
Because it might not seem on its face how it's relevant to the case. I think it's relevant to the racketeering charge. Remember, one of the possession with intent to distribute is one of the underlying predicate crimes, of racketeering. So having these materials, or allegedly having these materials and the guns, go to this idea of, a criminal enterprise. And I'll talk more about it. And I understand on cross-examination, the defense focused on the fact that Combs wasn't there during the raids. There was no evidence that he was holding or using the guns. They criticized the level of force. Talked about fingerprints that could have been obtained from the weapons. I want to talk actually about Dr. Dawn Hughes before I let you go. Dr. Dawn Hughes, right, this forensic psychologist testified in the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial. We knew she was going to take the stand in support of understanding Cassandra Ventura Fine's actions during this 11-year relationship, not leaving during this relationship, to help her credibility. What did we learn from Dr. Dawn Hughes' testimony so far today?
Yeah, we kind of learned a lot, especially for people who may not be familiar with her work or who speak to forensic psychologists necessarily every single day. And so we learned a little bit just from her perspective on just kind of the role she would be providing as far as testimony goes. And so she was going to be touching on points such as why do individuals stay in domestic violence relationships? Why is there this delayed disclosure, and even just kind of recalling memories from traumatic events. And so, when they were kind of establishing the foundation before her testimony, the prosecution just kind of came out forthright and just said that essentially that she was being compensated for her testimony today, $6,000 just to testify, which is a lot of money. I'm not going to lie about that. But as far as just more of just what she was talking about just about physical abuse, and when victims are hit, that their reaction normally is fear, and so they sometimes have that pattern of they sometimes have a hard time breaking that pattern. Then she got into physical abuse and how physical abuse, I said physical again, I meant psychological abuse. That psychological abuse is all about threatening physical violence, and that for the most part victims are kind of walking on eggshells, and these symptoms kind of include depression, PTSD, anxiety. Then she got into sexual abuse and how that is a private harm, and just some of the highest types of traumatic stress go into that, and that a lot of victims actually experience shame when it comes to sexual abuse. She touched base on emotional abuse as well too, and she had said when we when we belittle and demean and put down our partner, that kind of falls into emotional abuse. If you can't talk about what's happening, how can you necessarily get help? She talked about financial kind of constraints as far as why victims may not leave because of financial reasons. And then she had said that you need tangible reasons to leave. So how do you leave if you don't have tangible resources? And so that was kind of the basis, because there were a lot of objections today, Jesse.
Oh, I'm sure.
Despite the defense saying that they weren't going to have a bunch of objections. But one of the cool things I would say about the cross-examination is that we got to see Jonathan Bach actually kind of in action for the first time. He's one of Diddy's newest attorneys. I think he makes attorney number 9. And so I was kind of wondering during the cross-examination, because we did get to that before the lunch break, but whether or not these jurors were kind of like, who is this guy and why is he showing up on day 8 of trial? And so I was kind of curious what was going through their mind on seeing this new face today.
Hopefully they're not reading the news and trying trying to figure out what's going on. Listen, Elizabeth, I know you have to jump back in court. Thank you so much. We'll catch you later. Appreciate it.
Yes. Thanks, Jesse.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're getting to your questions online. Submit them on YouTube. I have a panel of great guests. I'm going to break down everything we just heard. Why is it relevant to the case? Why is it relevant to the charges? Stay with us here on Law and Crime. We'll be right back. And welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, and thanks for joining us. So we have this live lunchtime show in the Sean Diddy Combs criminal case. We just heard from Elizabeth Millner, who was inside that courtroom talking about the day's activities, about a special agent from Homeland Security talking about what was found at one of Sean Combs' properties. We're talking about the testimony of Dr. Dawn Hughes, this psychologist who was brought to the stand by the prosecution, talking about coping strategies, talking about why victims stay with their abusers. Really interesting testimony. A little bit of the cross as well. So we're going to be taking your questions for the next hour or so. Submit them on YouTube. We'll answer them here, but I'm not going to do it alone. I'm here with former prosecutor and criminal defense attorney Florina Altschuyler. Oh, great to see you. You're getting the first question because you came into studio. Thank you so much, Florina. But I love Jeremy Evans, and I love Joe Richardson, too, and they're going to be with us, too. Joe is a civil rights attorney. Jeremy Evans is a sports, entertainment, and media attorney. Great to have you all here. But, Florina, I'm going to start with you. So the first question that we have is, this is from Tia215 Aisha. Are they bringing Cassie back to the stand, Jesse? No. No, her testimony's done. She's 8.5 months pregnant. They wanted to make sure she finished her entire testimony week 1. The judge was adamant about that.
That is absolutely correct. They wanted to get her in, get her out, and be done, and I don't see how she's going to be brought back.
Is that a problem for the prosecution or defense, that they can't recall her?
I think that they've sufficiently established what they needed to establish with her, and there really is not a reason to recall her unless some witness later on brings something up that she potentially can then rebut that has not yet come in. And they would need to address that then, but I don't see how they get her back.
We have a question regarding the forensic testimony. So as I mentioned, Dr. Dawn Hughes, the psychologist, has took the stand earlier. I believe she's still going to be cross-examined when they come back. By the way, when they come back, we're going to give you real-time updates about what's happening in court, and we will break down the testimony in real time. But as I mentioned, she testified in the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial. One of the things she's discussing today are why victims stay, psychological bonds, the consequences, levels of fear, what psychological violence is, the effects of sexual abuse, emotional abuse, something called love bombing. Somebody just showers somebody with gifts and compliments to keep them in a relationship. Coping mechanisms, minimization, very important factors to talk about, because again, the question is, Cassandra Ventura claims she's a victim of sex trafficking. But why did she stay for 11 years? Why did it seem that there was evidence she was setting up these freak-offs and encouraging these freak-offs? There might be alternative explanations, and it might not be so easy for the jury just to accept she's not telling the truth. So here's the thing. I'll go to you, Joe. We have a question from Jesse K. How can there be 2 forensic psychologists testifying for each side? Shouldn't there be just one, i.e. the true explanation of trauma response and coping mechanisms, and not 2 versions of it? I mean, look, we don't know who the defense expert, we know who the defense expert's going to be. The name actually escapes me at the moment, but don't know exactly what they're going to testify to yet. But fair question. Why have so many different experts testify about this?
Well, my dad once told me it's better to have and not need than to need and not have. This is a complicated thing, and the prosecution knows, frankly, they have some explaining to do. There's a lot of people that might disagree with someone being in a relationship that's violent, that's abusive, etc. But everybody knows somebody that's been in that category. What they don't know is that, and what they've never thought of, and what the step that has to happen for this prosecution is that the jury's got to see that there's criminal acts involved with this happening. And so it may be that these 2 experts are dealing with 2 sides of the coin, 2 parts of the world, to be able to make sure that they explain everything that needs to explain. They need to explain and cover all bases, because I think there's an admission here that this is very complicated, because this is not something that people see. People are used to domestic violence. That doesn't mean that there's a criminal conspiracy. That doesn't mean that there's racketeering. That doesn't mean that there are RICO violations. So they've really got to do what they need to do to put it together so that despite the things that Cassie was actually saying about being in love, being in a wonderful relationship, wanting to do the freak offs, etc., that they take away that voluntary element so that what can be left over is the crime that they are alleging, the crimes that the prosecution are alleging took place here.
And put aside the fact that somebody like Cassie could arguably have agreed to this 95 times, but the 5 times she didn't agree to it, and if you're talking about the 2016 hotel incident, for example, or where she claimed she was on a plane and shown videos of freak-offs and then felt trapped and then was pressured afterwards to have a freak-off with Diddy, you could say those are instances that are not consensual and make up sex trafficking, although this is complicated. It's a gray area. Jeremy, we have a question for you from Mahogany29. Did Kid Cudi testify yet? No, he didn't testify yet. I know he didn't testify yet, but let me expand the question to you. What are you expecting from his testimony, Jeremy?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think the close relationship and the dispute, amongst the parties, I think clearly leads that, and then the potential that the car was going to be firebombed. I think a lot of these things, kind of like with what Joe was talking about, when you sort of include in the guns and the drugs and everything else that's been going to be put into evidence, and you put in this fact that, Diddy was potentially trying to firebomb a car based on a relationship. I think that's the sort of evidence that would need to go to a RICO charge. They're so rare in terms of coming against celebrities, but it's something that prosecutors have been more willing to do. So I think if anything, the testimony is going to try to go more towards that RICO charge.